Okay, I have 1500 UTC, so let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Configure Group conversation. I am Daniel. I am the product manager for the Configure Group, which currently entails the Configure Group and the serverless subgroup. So dealing with all of your auto DevOps, Kubernetes, and serverless needs. Let's go ahead and take your questions. Okay, I see no questions yet. So we'll just get everyone a second to go over the slides, which are linked on the Google Doc on the invitation for this call. And if you don't have access to the doc because you're not on your computer or otherwise, please feel free to speak up.
Hey, Daniel, do you know of anybody using the Runbooks, like the interactive Runbooks?
Thank you, Sid. That's a good question. So Sid is asking about the Jupyter Runbooks. So one can deploy Jupyter in your Kubernetes cluster, and then you can create executable runbooks. So we've had conversations both with internal groups and with Jupyter users, but it's mostly the use cases that we've met so far is that it's being used for data science teams just as a regular notebook for Jupyter. We have not come across users for executable runbooks. We think it's mainly due to two reasons. So number one, it's the bar of entry. So like all the stuff that you need to write, even with something as simple as the Roombooks library, is high. So we've identified there that having more examples on how to do common tasks will help us. That's number one. And then number two, the provisioning of access for large teams. So, people still have a hard time figuring that out in the Jupyter world. How would we provision this for an ops team? So that's something kind of related, and we have a couple of issues to try to increase that usage.
Cool. Do you think there's a chance of having our own infrastructure team use it?
We have a lot of change with our infrastructure team in how the notebooks get executed and all the different systems that we use. So with that being said, the two systems that we have that are kind of easy to write notebooks for is Kubernetes and also AWS. So for the Kubernetes related things, I think that we could start there. And I think that we could use it for our Kubernetes related notebooks. I don't think that we have any yet, but when we do, as we move more and more to Kubernetes, we could start there. But other than that, we could just manually write all of the queries and all of the things that we do systems-wise without having to make use of the Roombooks library, because that's optional. That is kind of a bit of work, but that's also another good starting point.
Well, help me a bit here because we have most of our infrastructure, most of GitLab.com is not Kubernetes yet, and we're switching, but it's going to take some time. But I assume these runbooks, although they have to be deployed, they run on Kubernetes. They don't necessarily have to operate on Kubernetes infrastructure. You could, I don't know, be hosting stuff on Raspberry Pis, but you could still use the runbooks in order to do queries and other things. Is that the case?
Absolutely.
Or I'm mistaken?
That is the case. And what I meant by that is that the libraries that we have right now that help users write those runbooks are right now specifically for Kubernetes and for AWS. So as we move more of our infrastructure into Kubernetes, we could make use of what we have today to write those runbooks.
But we don't need any of our existing infrastructure on Kubernetes, right? If we're going to use these runbooks, it has to be separate infrastructure anyway, probably even on a different cloud provider, because if you're going to do debugging, like you don't want, if Google goes down, like it went down last week, the last thing you want going down is your monitoring stack and your runbook stack, because that's how you can make changes. So in my mind, although it's all in GitLab, we should have it deployed on separate infrastructure. So we could just deploy that part on AWS tomorrow. There's no need for us to change anything in the infrastructure. If anything, you can leave the infrastructure the same and put it on a different, completely different setup.
So do you mean not deploying Jupyter to Kubernetes, but to somewhere else?
To Kubernetes, but on AWS. Yeah, we don't want, like, so GitLab should be able to do self-monitoring. GitLab should be able to deploy Runbooks, but I don't think we want our monitoring and our Runbooks running on the same infrastructure. Like, suppose we have an outage of some sort, a load balancer, a VPN that goes down, we get flagged for something. Like, all of these failure modes, like, the last thing you want going down is your monitoring stack. Like, big reason Google got in trouble last week was because they were using the same network to do diagnostics. So they had a really, really tough time recovering from that. So we should make sure that we do use it on different things. Like, for example, in Basecamp, all their infrastructure nodes are in Confluent because they ship a SaaS product. And if their SaaS thing is down, the last thing they want being down are their nodes. So I think we should be using our own infrastructure, but that doesn't mean we should host it all in the same part, or it should be the same instance. So using our own product should be same instance.
But Sid, I think what I was saying was that the libraries that we ship with our current integration are written. They have libraries that help you manage Kubernetes as your target, and so we won't be able to use those libraries with ours if we're not also deploying Kubernetes. So
yeah, that makes sense.
But those libraries wouldn't be useful yet.
Yeah, but still, we probably want a runbook like slow queries on Postgres and all the regular stuff. Like we have.
You could handwrite. You could handwrite without those libraries for sure, and that's a good starting point. So I think that it's just a matter of identifying kind of a good starting point, even if we have to handwrite it and doing it there. But yes, it is viable for our team to use that internally, especially now that we have the Git integration set to ship in 12.0, you're going to be able to version control all of those things from Jupyter. So it is viable. And yeah, it is something that we'll follow up on as part of our internal customer, being at the infra team. Thanks, Sid.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Great.
Andrew, would you like to verbalize your question?
Yeah, sorry, I was just trying to write down first. With the Runbooks, I don't really know this functionality very well at the moment, so apologies if this is well known, but like, can you connect it to something like Prometheus and get it to graph Prometheus from the Runbooks?
Yes, so you can connect it to any external system because you can provide it both at the endpoints and the credentials for each one of those systems, and then you can bring over the data from that system there.
And does it have a reasonable system for managing secrets?
Well, so right now, they are stored as environment variables. But we have it kind of on our roadmap to do it in a more standardized way. But I think it's a good starting point. And yeah, maybe we should chat further about that and see if we can come up with a proof of concept that we can use for Prometheus, which I think it's a very common use case that you, if you have a downtime scenario and you execute a couple of queries or a couple of changes in your infrastructure, and then you want to query to see if that changed something. So yeah, it's interesting. That's something I'll follow up on.
Cool, thanks.
And as a follow-up, I'm taking some notes with Eric because I've seen this hesitance before. So maybe we should document, like, we want to use the same product, but different instances. We have the GitLab.com service to other people, but then we have GitLab.com monitoring, which should be separate, GitLab.com Runbooks, which should be separate, gitlab.com CD, which probably should be separate. And if we have this confusion, then we get things like, oh, we have to use Kubernetes in order to use our Runbooks, or we can't use GitLab monitoring because what if GitLab is down? And that's because that's something I heard from the infrastructure team, and that's preventing us from using our own products, which we should. And I think, for example, for monitoring, it's held us back that we're not using our own product.
Just one other point on the Prometheus API. We also need to make sure we have the correct sort of network access between the Kubernetes cluster and Prometheus, which isn't trivial, but it's not just a matter of getting the right library and pulling the values. We also need to be able to access the Prometheus values from the where the Jupyter kernels are being executed.
And Daniel, since even people like Andrew who are pretty up to speed don't even know what our Runbooks functionality is, maybe it's fun to kind of walk through the docs or just verbalize it for a few minutes.
Yes, absolutely. So let me share my screen and I'll walk through the docs here and I will tell you what it's all about. 1 second. All right. So here, let's go to GitLab Runbooks. And here I see the docs is the second link. And so basically what Runbooks are all about are a set of procedures that generally an operator will conduct at a given time. So they are very popular, let's say in cases of downtime. So for example, if system X is currently down, an operator would bring up that runbook and follow through a series of steps. Historically, those are kind of text only. So if you saw here, when I executed this Google search, the Runbooks repo is kind of the first thing that came up, our own, basically. And here you can kind of see that these are on-call runbooks, and they have kind of a set of procedure of what to do. And it tells you go to a certain Slack channel, do this, do that. So the value of having executable runbooks is that you visit your runbook once, and you don't have to leave your runbook to follow all of those steps. So instead of tweet this and you having to go to TweetDeck and send out a tweet, you would configure that access within your runbook and simply click a button, maybe enter some text within your runbook and do that. Then you move on to the next step. Go to Slack channel and go to this channel and do this. So you would do the same thing within your runbook. So I was chatting about the kind of the high level of entry there. The bar of entry is high because you kind of have to handwrite all the code of all the systems that are interacting with one another. So the beauty of our runbooks is that they ship with the Roombooks library here, and it's an open source library that has. It makes it easy to write commands specifically for AWS and Kubernetes. So things that would be, let's say, maybe 100 lines of code become maybe 5 to 10 lines of code, and it has calls for all the most common things like plotting metrics from CloudWatch and things like that. And it's very easy to get started with GitLab. The only thing that you need to do is install Jupyter from your cluster. You can even use like a nib.io DNS based on your Ingress DNS and log in to your notebook. And you can log in with GitLab, so it's fully integrated with OAuth. And then you can kind of see once you are within your notebook, we ship with a demo that has kind of sample queries that you can play with and get an idea on how to build your own. And that is basically the gist of what GitLab Runbooks are all about.
What's top of your mind for you, Daniel?
Right now, I'm spending a bit of time trying to find candidates for our serverless team. That has been tough. So with some help from our recruiting team, I now have some tools that I can use to make it easier for me to find candidates and basically work out lists. And so that's I would say up there with my top three. Additionally, PaaS is also high in my mind, and kind of the strategy that we will use towards PaaS and what even PaaS will mean for us. So we know that we want to use resources in an efficient way, and we want it to be secure. And now we are leaning more towards separating those concerns, right? So we want to give security by default, but that doesn't mean that we have to restrict how you use resources. So those conversations kind of have evolved to having that separation of concerns. And I think that, yeah, we maybe focused too much on GitLab.com at the beginning. And I think that because most of our user base is self-managed, we should maybe solve the use case for the 75% of users first and provide them with a nice application development platform or PaaS. And then maybe we move on to GitLab.com and providing a good strategy there. Additionally, I think the product OKRs are always top of mind. So for Q2, we have three. The first one is making sure that we can prove that our directions items are successful, which is closely tied to the metrics that we provide for each one of our features. The second one is around customer discovery sessions. That's basically having not only talking about a feature or a single use case, but more of a deeper conversation with our customers. And I think that that's great because that's something that we have to be intentional about. Kind of the use case and the, I have a problem conversations come up very easily, but those deeper conversations, that do take some more work. And then the last one is just growing the use of GitLab. So those are, in everything we do, I think that we always keep those in mind. And then the viability of our main features, which is auto DevOps and the Kubernetes integration.
Thanks.
Anthony, would you like to verbalize your question?
Yeah, so this just has to do with something that, when I saw you bring up the documentation, I saw just a lot of, Anthony Saba, threat intel engineer on the security team. And I guess taking it back a step, I could see this as something that maybe the security team, in addition to the infrastructure team, would also be like a natural kind of user of this. But there is that setup step. So I think, just to reiterate, like examples of getting started, I think would be really helpful there. And
that's a great point. Sorry, Anthony, go ahead.
Yeah. And then beyond that, the examples are for Python. There's other kernels. I think there is a Ruby kernel that's workable. How easy is it to get going with an alternate kernel? Do we have any additional support for that, or is once it's running, you're on your own managing that? And then the follow-on is what do we see customers using? Because when you say data science, I think Python, is that true of what's being used?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that Jupyter is notably like a data tool, right? Like data science teams and data teams use, this is the sort of tool that they use to share data and basically share approaches to data and things like that. So right now, it's when you say kernel, do you mean the OS that we're deploying Jupyter to?
No, Jupyter has its own concept of kernel, which is the processor, and so you can. I believe the terminology, because I'm not a big Jupyter user, is that if you want to write your runbook in Ruby, you install the Ruby Jupyter kernel, and they just use that terminology.
Okay, yeah. So the only one that we have right now is indeed the Python one, but anything that's supported by Jupyter, you could install on your Jupyter instance that is deployed to GitLab. So it doesn't have any limitation. This is like a full-blown Jupyter notebook and Jupyter Hub server with all the features that come with it. So yes, you could put any kernel on it that you'd like. Yeah, and I'll follow up with you to see like some of the use cases for the security team, because we have not thought of you historically as an internal customer, but it's great that this fits some of your processes. Yeah, let's chat.
I'll post a link to the security runbook. It doesn't come up in Google search because it's internal.
It's probably a good thing that it doesn't. Yeah.
All right. Well, if there's no other questions, would you agree to have us complete this meeting?
Yeah, I think there were 2 minutes out, so I think that would be okay.
Very good.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.